The small-town courthouse was buzzing with activity that morning. People shuffled in and out, some carrying folders filled with legal documents, others whispering nervously about their cases. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in his crisp police uniform. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he waited patiently outside the courtroom. Marcus had been called to testify in a minor case involving vandalism, a routine matter for someone of his experience. But there was something about this day that felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. As Marcus entered the courtroom, all eyes turned toward him. He walked with confidence, his polished boots clicking against the tiled floor. The room wasn't particularly large, but it carried an air of authority, with its wooden benches and high ceiling. At the front sat Judge Evelyn Harper, her sharp features framed by graying hair pulled into a tight bun. Known for her stern demeanor, she rarely smiled, and today was no exception. Her piercing gaze swept over the room, settling briefly on Marcus before moving on. Something in her expression made him uneasy, though he brushed it off as nerves. Marcus took his seat at the witness stand, adjusting his tie as he prepared to speak. When questioned by the prosecutor, he answered clearly and calmly, laying out the facts of the case without embellishment. It was straightforward testimony, nothing controversial or complicated. Yet almost immediately, Judge Harper interrupted with a question of her own. Her tone was clipped, her words laced with sarcasm. "Detective Thompson," she began, leaning forward slightly, "do you really believe your account is reliable? After all, we've seen mistakes happen before." The comment caught Marcus off guard, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded respectfully and replied, "I assure you, Your Honor, my report is accurate." Though polite, his response only seemed to irritate the judge further. She pressed on, her questions becoming more pointed. "And how can we trust someone who might not fully understand the complexities of our legal system?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some spectators exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or gasp. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension building in the room. Despite the growing hostility, Marcus remained composed. He reminded himself why he was here, to do his job and uphold justice. Still, he couldn't ignore the undertones of her remarks. They weren't just challenging his professionalism. They were questioning his very competence because of the color of his skin. It was subtle enough to be dismissed as mere frustration by those unfamiliar with such tactics, but Marcus knew better. This wasn't the first time he'd faced prejudice, nor would it be the last. What surprised him most, however, was the brazenness of it all. Most people hid their biases behind closed doors, but Judge Harper appeared unbothered, almost eager to display hers. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. The once neutral space now felt charged with emotion. Marcus could feel the weight of everyone's stares, the curious, the sympathetic, and the judgmental alike. Despite the pressure, he kept his focus, determined not to let the judge's behavior distract him. Little did anyone know, including Judge Harper herself, that Marcus wasn't just a witness in this case. Beneath his calm exterior lay a secret mission, one that would soon turn the tables in ways no one could have anticipated. Judge Harper's behavior only grew worse as the minutes passed. Her initial jabs had been subtle, almost veiled, but now they were impossible to ignore. Each question she directed at Marcus seemed designed not to seek clarity but to undermine him. "Detective," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "are you certain your memory of the events is accurate? People sometimes embellish details when they think it will help their case." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. She paused for effect, letting them sink in before continuing, especially those who aren't accustomed to testifying in court. The gallery erupted into murmurs again, some louder than before. A few spectators exchanged uneasy glances, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One elderly woman leaned over to her companion and whispered, "Is she really saying what I think she's saying?" Her companion nodded grimly, clearly disturbed by the judge's tone. Even the prosecutor looked taken aback, though he didn't dare interrupt. Instead, he scribbled something on his notepad, perhaps planning how to address the situation later. Marcus, however, remained unfazed. His years of experience as a police officer had taught him to stay calm under pressure. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and responded evenly. "Your Honor, my testimony is based on facts gathered during the investigation. If you have specific concerns about the evidence, I'd be happy to clarify." His voice was steady, betraying no hint of anger or frustration. But inside, Marcus felt a flicker of indignation. He recognized the pattern, her dismissive tone, the thinly veiled insinuations, the way she twisted ordinary questions into accusations. It was a tactic meant to shake his confidence, to make him doubt himself in front of everyone. But Marcus refused to let her win. Instead, he focused on maintaining his composure, knowing that losing his temper would only give her more ammunition. Still, the tension in the room was palpable. Every time Judge Harper spoke, it felt like another layer of hostility being added to an already charged atmosphere. Her next comment was particularly biting. "You know, Detective Thompson," she said, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority, "some individuals tend to see things through a lens of personal bias. Are you sure your account isn't influenced by external factors?" The implication was clear, and this time, even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably where he stood. Marcus locked eyes with the judge, his expression neutral but resolute. "I assure you, Your Honor, my only goal here is to present the truth," he replied firmly. There was a brief pause, the kind that happens when everyone in the room realizes something significant has just occurred. The judge's lips tightened, and for a moment, it seemed like she might push further. But then she glanced down at her papers, seemingly satisfied, for now, that she had made her point. What no one else knew, however, was that Marcus wasn't just enduring her insults out of duty. Beneath his calm exterior lay a simmering determination. He had dealt with prejudice throughout his career, from colleagues who doubted his abilities to suspects who tried to provoke him. Yet each encounter had only strengthened his resolve to prove himself, not just as a capable officer, but as someone committed to fairness and justice. And today, sitting in that courtroom, he vowed silently that Judge Harper wouldn't get away with her behavior. Little did she realize that her actions were playing right into his hands. Outside the courthouse, Marcus's partner, Detective Lisa Rivera, was monitoring the situation closely. Through a series of discreet text messages, Marcus had kept her updated on the judge's conduct. Lisa knew exactly what was happening and why it mattered. For months, they had been gathering evidence against Judge Harper as part of a larger investigation into corruption within the local justice system. Her racist remarks weren't just offensive. They were part of a broader pattern of misconduct that needed to be exposed. As Marcus endured her barbs, Lisa worked quickly behind the scenes, ensuring they had everything they needed to act decisively. Back inside the courtroom, the tension continued to build. Spectators whispered among themselves, some outraged by the judge's behavior, others too stunned to react. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly, his mind racing. He knew the stakes were high, not just for himself, but for everyone affected by systemic inequality. Judge Harper thought she held all the power, but Marcus knew better. Justice had a way of catching up with people, often when they least expected it. And as the hearing dragged on, Marcus couldn't help but feel that reckoning was closer than anyone realized. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Judge Harper, perhaps emboldened by the lack of resistance from Marcus, decided to push even further. Her next comment shattered any pretense of professionalism. "Detective Thompson," she said, her voice cold and cutting, "I find it hard to believe that someone like you could remain impartial in a situation like this. People with your background often struggle to separate emotion from fact." The words landed like a punch, heavy and deliberate. She didn't elaborate on what she meant by your background, but the implication was crystal clear. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The prosecutor's pen hovered midair, forgotten. A few people in the gallery audibly gasped, while others looked away, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Even the court stenographer paused, her fingers hovering over the keys, as if unsure whether to transcribe such a blatant insult. Marcus felt the weight of her words pressing down on him, but instead of crumbling under their impact, he felt something else, a quiet spark of defiance igniting within him. He had faced discrimination before, but hearing it so openly in a place meant to uphold justice made his blood boil. Still, he didn't react immediately. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the sting of her words settle without showing any outward sign of distress. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but firm. "Your Honor," he began, locking eyes with her, "if my testimony is unsatisfactory, I welcome any specific questions or evidence-based challenges you may have. But I assure you, my integrity is not up for debate." His words carried authority, commanding respect even in the face of her hostility. For a split second, Judge Harper's confidence wavered. She blinked, taken aback by his composure, but quickly masked her surprise with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're entitled to your opinion, Detective," she replied curtly, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her tone now. "Let's move on." She turned her attention back to the prosecutor, signaling that the matter was closed, for her, at least. But Marcus knew better. This wasn't just about one heated exchange in a courtroom. It was about accountability. And as far as he was concerned, Judge Harper had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. As the hearing continued, Marcus subtly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, careful not to draw attention. Under the guise of adjusting his tie, he sent a quick text to Detective Lisa Rivera. "She's playing right into it, ready to execute." Within seconds, Lisa responded, "We're good to go. Stand by." Marcus allowed himself a small inward smile. What Judge Harper didn't realize was that her behavior today, her condescending remarks, her thinly veiled racism, was only strengthening the case against her. For months, Marcus and Lisa had been investigating allegations of corruption tied to her courtroom, including accusations of accepting bribes to influence verdicts. Her actions today would serve as the final piece of evidence they needed to act. Back outside the courthouse, Lisa worked swiftly, coordinating with federal agents who were already en route. They had anticipated needing more time to gather conclusive proof, but Judge Harper's reckless behavior had accelerated their timeline. As Lisa briefed the team over the phone, she couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Justice might sometimes feel delayed, but when it arrived, it often came with perfect timing. Inside the courtroom, Marcus focused on finishing his testimony, answering each remaining question with precision and clarity. He refused to let Judge Harper distract him, no matter how much venom she injected into her tone. With every word he spoke, he reminded himself of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or mistreated because of their race. It was about proving that no one, not even a judge, was above accountability. When the prosecutor finally concluded his questioning, Marcus rose from the witness stand and stepped down without another glance at Judge Harper. As he walked toward the exit, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The battle wasn't over yet, but he knew the tide was turning. Outside the courtroom doors, federal agents were waiting, arrest warrant in hand. Judge Harper had spent years abusing her power, hiding behind her title and robes. But today, she had unknowingly sealed her own fate. 7 minutes later, the entire courthouse would erupt in chaos, and Marcus would be standing tall, watching justice take its course. As Marcus stepped out of the courtroom, the weight of what was about to happen settled over him. The hallway outside was quiet, save for the distant murmur of voices from other courtrooms and the occasional shuffle of footsteps. He leaned against the wall for a moment, collecting his thoughts. Despite the tension inside, he felt a strange sense of clarity now. This wasn't just about revenge or personal vindication. It was about exposing a system that had allowed someone like Judge Harper to operate unchecked for far too long. While Marcus had been testifying, Detective Lisa Rivera had been working tirelessly behind the scenes. Her phone buzzed constantly as she coordinated with federal agents who were preparing to execute the arrest warrant. She stood near the courthouse entrance, pretending to scroll through documents while keeping an eye on the corridor leading to Judge Harper's courtroom. Every so often, she glanced at her watch, counting down the minutes until they could move in. The plan was simple but precise. Wait for Marcus's signal, then act swiftly and decisively. Back in the courtroom, Judge Harper seemed oblivious to the storm brewing outside. She continued presiding over the case, her tone as sharp as ever. To anyone watching, she appeared completely in control, untouchable, even. But beneath her polished exterior, cracks were beginning to show. Her earlier comments toward Marcus had been unusually aggressive, even for her, betraying a level of arrogance that bordered on recklessness. It was almost as if she believed her position granted her immunity, not just from criticism but from consequences. That belief would soon prove to be her downfall. Outside, the federal agents arrived quietly, blending into the crowd of courthouse visitors. Dressed in plain clothes, they carried themselves with the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of experience. One agent approached Lisa, nodding briefly to confirm they were ready. She gave a subtle thumbs up in response, then sent a final text to Marcus. Go time. Within moments, Marcus received the message. He took a deep breath, straightened his uniform, and walked back toward the courtroom door. Inside, the hearing was wrapping up. The prosecutor thanked Marcus for his testimony, and Judge Harper announced a brief recess before moving on to the next case. As court staff began gathering papers and spectators filed out, Marcus lingered near the doorway, ensuring he was in position. Outside, the agents moved closer, their presence unnoticed by most. When Judge Harper finally rose from her seat, adjusting her robe with an air of authority, the room began to clear. That's when the first agent entered, followed closely by Lisa and two others. At first, no one realized what was happening. The bailiff turned to ask who they were, but before he could speak, Lisa held up the arrest warrant. Judge Evelyn Harper, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of confusion. You are under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. For a split second, there was complete silence. Then chaos erupted. Spectators gasped, some rising from their seats to get a better view. Court employees froze, unsure how to react. And Judge Harper? Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, her voice trembling with indignation. Do you know who I am? The lead agent stepped forward, his expression unreadable. We do, ma'am. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Judge Harper looked around wildly, searching for support, or perhaps an escape, but finding neither. Her once commanding presence crumbled before everyone's eyes. Marcus watched from the doorway, his arms crossed. Though he didn't say a word, his stance spoke volumes. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, always found its way. As Judge Harper was led away, flanked by agents, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a lingering sadness. Sadness not for her, but for the countless lives she had impacted with her actions. Still, today marked a turning point, a moment when accountability triumphed over arrogance. And as the courthouse buzzed with whispers of disbelief, Marcus knew the fight for fairness was far from over. But it was a fight worth continuing. The courtroom, once a place of order and authority, now resembled a scene from a drama unfolding in real time. As Judge Harper was led out in handcuffs, her protests echoed off the walls, sharp and indignant. This is outrageous. You have no right to do this, she shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief and fury. Her usually composed demeanor had completely unraveled, replaced by raw panic. She twisted her head back toward the gallery, searching for allies or at least someone who might share her outrage. But all she found were stunned faces, some wide-eyed with shock, others exchanging uneasy glances. Marcus stood near the doorway, his arms still crossed, watching silently as the agents escorted her past him. For a moment, their eyes met. Judge Harper's gaze burned with anger and humiliation, but Marcus's expression remained calm and resolute. There was no gloating in his stance, no sense of triumph beyond the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice served. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone spoke volumes. It was a powerful reminder that titles and robes didn't grant immunity, not when those privileges were abused. As the group moved down the hallway, the commotion spilled into the main lobby of the courthouse. People stopped in their tracks, craning their necks to see what was happening. A few whispered nervously, while others pulled out their phones to capture the surreal moment. One elderly man muttered under his breath, "Never thought I'd see something like this," shaking his head in disbelief. Meanwhile, a young woman holding a toddler clapped softly, earning disapproving looks from some but nods of agreement from others. The atmosphere buzzed with a mix of confusion, curiosity, and cautious optimism. Outside, reporters who had been tipped off about the operation were already gathering. Camera flashes popped as Judge Harper emerged from the building, flanked by federal agents. Her face was flushed red, her earlier arrogance replaced by sheer mortification. When one reporter called out, "Judge Harper, do you have any comment on these charges?" she turned away sharply, refusing to acknowledge them. The sight of such a powerful figure reduced to silence sent ripples through the crowd. Some cheered quietly, while others simply stared, trying to process the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Back inside the courthouse, the aftermath felt almost surreal. Court staff bustled around, attempting to restore some semblance of normalcy, though the tension lingered in the air. The prosecutor who had questioned Marcus approached him cautiously, offering a handshake. "Detective Thompson, I can't imagine how difficult that must have been," he said sincerely. Marcus nodded, accepting the gesture. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, his tone measured, but it had to be done. Lisa joined him shortly after, her usual no-nonsense demeanor softened by a hint of pride. "You handled yourself well in there," she said, giving him a small smile. Marcus shrugged modestly. "We did what we came here to do," he replied, emphasizing the collective effort. Still, he couldn't deny the significance of the day's events. Watching Judge Harper being arrested, a woman who just hours ago had wielded immense power over the lives of others, was a testament to the importance of perseverance and integrity. As the initial chaos began to settle, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He thought about the countless individuals who had likely suffered under Judge Harper's biased rulings, their voices silenced by her abuse of authority. Today wasn't just about holding her accountable. It was about sending a message that fairness mattered more than fear. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but moments like this planted seeds of hope. Before leaving the courthouse, Marcus glanced back at the now empty courtroom. The space, once dominated by hostility and prejudice, felt oddly peaceful. Justice hadn't arrived without struggle, but it had come nonetheless. And as he stepped outside into the bright sunlight, surrounded by murmurs of admiration and relief, Marcus knew that today would mark the beginning of something bigger, a step toward a future where accountability wasn't an exception, but the rule. The arrest of Judge Evelyn Harper sent shockwaves through the courthouse and beyond. As the federal agents escorted her out, reporters swarmed like bees around a hive, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward in hopes of capturing even a single word from the disgraced judge. But Judge Harper wasn't speaking. Not anymore. Her earlier defiance had melted into stunned silence as reality sank in. She was no longer the one wielding power. She was now the subject of scrutiny, her name dragged into the public eye for all the wrong reasons. Inside the courthouse, whispers filled the halls. Court employees huddled in small groups, discussing what had just happened. Some expressed disbelief, struggling to reconcile the image of their stern but authoritative judge with the allegations against her. Others weren't surprised at all. "I always thought something was off about her," muttered a clerk to her colleague. "She treated people differently depending on who they were." It's sad it took this long to catch up with her. The sentiment echoed throughout the building, a mix of vindication for those who had felt wronged and regret that such behavior had gone unchecked for so long. Marcus stood near the entrance, observing the scene unfold. He could feel eyes on him, some curious, some admiring, but he kept his focus steady. This wasn't about personal glory. Still, he couldn't deny the significance of what had transpired. When Judge Harper passed him earlier, handcuffed and humiliated, Marcus had locked eyes with her. There was no malice in his gaze, only a quiet resolve. In that moment, he wanted her to understand one thing. Justice wasn't personal. It was impartial. Whether you wore a badge or a robe, whether you commanded respect or demanded it, no one was above the law. One of the federal agents approached Marcus, offering a respectful nod. "Great work today, Detective," he said. "You handled yourself with real professionalism." Marcus thanked him, but quickly redirected the praise. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "This was a team effort. We've been working toward this for months." The agent smiled knowingly. "Still, it takes guts to sit through what you did without losing your cool. Most people wouldn't have been able to keep their composure." As the crowd outside began to thin, Lisa joined Marcus, her expression a mix of relief and satisfaction. "Well, that went better than expected," she remarked, leaning against the railing beside him. Marcus chuckled softly. "Better. I think unexpected is the word you're looking for." They shared a brief laugh before falling silent, both reflecting on the day's events. For Lisa, it was a reminder of why they did what they did, to uphold justice, even when it meant going up against powerful figures. For Marcus, it was validation that standing firm in the face of prejudice wasn't futile. It made a difference. Later that afternoon, news of Judge Harper's arrest spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with reactions ranging from outrage over her alleged corruption to admiration for the detectives and agents who had brought her down. Local news stations aired segments detailing the investigation, highlighting how months of careful planning had culminated in today's dramatic takedown. Headlines blared phrases like "Judge arrested for corruption after racist outburst" and "Justice served, power abused, power checked." Back at the precinct, Marcus's colleagues greeted him with applause when he walked in. Some patted him on the back, while others simply gave knowing nods. Captain Reynolds, the head of the department, called Marcus into his office for a private conversation. "You've done good work here, Thompson," he said, handing Marcus a cup of coffee. "Not just today, but every day. You remind us why we put on this uniform, to serve and protect, no matter the cost." Marcus accepted the compliment graciously, but reminded the captain that the fight wasn't over. "Taking down one corrupt official doesn't fix the system," he said thoughtfully. "But it's a start. People need to see that accountability exists, even at the highest levels." The captain nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. "And they will," he added, "because of men like you." That evening, as Marcus drove home, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Today had been exhausting, emotionally, mentally, and physically, but it had also been rewarding. Watching Judge Harper being led away in handcuffs wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about proving that integrity mattered more than intimidation. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but moments like these planted seeds of hope. Seeds that would grow into a future where fairness triumphed over fear, and justice wasn't an exception. It was the rule. The days following Judge Harper's arrest were a whirlwind of activity and reflection for Marcus. News of the dramatic courtroom takedown continued to dominate headlines, sparking conversations far beyond the small town where it had happened. People debated the implications of her arrest. Some praised the swift action taken against corruption, while others questioned how someone in such a position of authority could fall so far. For Marcus, however, the attention wasn't what mattered most. What truly resonated with him were the quiet moments, the personal stories shared by strangers who felt inspired to speak up after seeing justice served. One evening, as Marcus sat at his desk reviewing case files, there was a knock on his office door. He looked up to see an older woman standing there. clutching a folder tightly to her chest. She introduced herself as Mrs. Clara Bennett, explaining that she had come to thank him personally. "I've been wanting to tell my story for years," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "But I never thought anyone would listen." With Marcus's encouragement, she began recounting how Judge Harper had presided over a custody battle involving her grandson several years ago. According to Mrs. Bennett, the judge had dismissed evidence of neglect by the child's father simply because the mother, a single parent struggling financially, didn't fit Harper's idea of stability. The ruling had torn their family apart, leaving scars that still lingered. Mrs. Bennett wasn't alone. Over the next few days, more people came forward, sharing similar experiences. A young man recounted being unfairly sentenced for a minor offense after Judge Harper mocked his lack of legal representation. A business owner described how her company lost a legitimate lawsuit due to what she believed was blatant bias. Each story added another layer to the portrait of a system tainted by prejudice and abuse of power. Listening to them, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about taking down one corrupt official. It was about giving a voice to those who had been silenced. Meanwhile, the community rallied around the issue, organizing meetings to discuss ways to address inequality within the justice system. At one such gathering, Marcus found himself seated among residents, activists, and local leaders. The room buzzed with energy as people exchanged ideas about reform, everything from implementing stricter oversight for judges to creating mentorship programs aimed at increasing diversity in law enforcement and the courts. When Marcus finally stood to speak, the crowd fell silent. "I'm not here to pretend I have all the answers," he began, his tone humble but firm. "What I do know is that change starts with accountability. It starts with each of us refusing to accept injustice, no matter how deeply rooted it may seem." His words struck a chord, earning nods of agreement and applause. Afterward, several attendees approached him to express gratitude, not just for his role in exposing Judge Harper, but for reminding them that progress was possible when people worked together. Despite the positive momentum, Marcus couldn't ignore the emotional toll the past week had taken. Late at night, when the noise of the world faded away, he often found himself replaying the events in his mind. The sting of Judge Harper's insults hadn't disappeared entirely. They lingered like faint bruises, reminders of the systemic racism he fought every day. Yet, alongside the pain was a growing sense of hope. Seeing so many people step forward, united in their desire for fairness, reminded him why he chose this path in the first place. Lisa noticed the weight on Marcus's shoulders and made sure to check in regularly. "You don't have to carry this alone, you know," she told him during one of their late-night debriefs. Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm not carrying it alone," he replied. "We're all in this together, everyone who believes in doing what's right." Lisa nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Justice wasn't the responsibility of one person or even one department. It was a collective effort, driven by individuals willing to stand up for what they believed in. As the weeks passed, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Judge Harper's case moved into the legal process, with investigators uncovering even more evidence of misconduct. Meanwhile, Marcus threw himself back into his work, determined to keep pushing forward. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that every step, no matter how small, brought them closer to a fairer, more just society. And sometimes, in quieter moments, Marcus allowed himself to dream of a future where stories like Mrs. Bennett's weren't commonplace, that instead of fighting against injustice, people could focus on building communities rooted in trust, respect, and the weeks following Judge Harper's arrest marked the beginning of a larger movement in the small town. What had started as an isolated incident of accountability grew into something far more significant, a community-wide push for change. People who had once felt powerless began to realize that their voices mattered, and they weren't afraid to use them anymore. Marcus became an unintentional symbol of this shift, his quiet strength inspiring others to stand up against injustice. At a local community meeting held in the town hall, residents gathered to discuss reforms within the justice system. The room was packed. Parents with young children, elderly couples, teenagers eager to make a difference, all united by a shared desire for fairness. Marcus sat at the front, listening intently as people shared their ideas. Some suggested creating citizen oversight committees to monitor judicial decisions, while others proposed mandatory bias training for court officials. A high school teacher even pitched the idea of partnering with schools to educate students about civic responsibility and equality. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood slowly, taking a moment to look around the room. His eyes met those of Mrs. Clara Bennett, whose story had touched so many hearts, and he nodded slightly before addressing the crowd. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he began, his voice steady but warm. "It takes time, effort, and most importantly, courage. But I believe in this community. I believe in us. Together, we can create a system where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, not because of who they are or where they come from, but because that's what justice demands." His words resonated deeply, earning applause that echoed through the hall. Afterward, several attendees approached him to thank him, not just for exposing Judge Harper's corruption, but for reminding them that progress was possible when people worked together. For Marcus, these interactions were humbling. He didn't see himself as a hero. He was simply someone doing his job. But he understood now how powerful it could be to lead by example. In the months that followed, tangible changes began to take shape. The City Council approved funding for programs aimed at increasing diversity within law enforcement and the courts. Local organizations partnered with schools to host workshops on systemic inequality and advocacy. Even some judges and lawyers attended seminars on implicit bias, acknowledging that self-reflection was key to building trust within the community. While none of these efforts solved every problem overnight, they represented important steps toward lasting reform. For Marcus personally, life settled into a new rhythm. Though the initial frenzy surrounding Judge Harper's arrest had died down, its impact lingered. He received letters from strangers thanking him for his bravery. And occasionally, he'd run into someone at the grocery store who would shake his hand and say, "You gave us hope." These moments reminded him why he chose this path, to serve others and uphold justice, no matter how challenging it might be. Still, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption and prejudice weren't unique to their town. They existed everywhere, often hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and denial. But witnessing the resilience of his community gave him faith that change was possible. Every person who spoke up, every policy that was rewritten, every child who learned about fairness, it all contributed to a brighter future. One evening, as Marcus drove home after a long day at work, he passed by the courthouse. Its grand columns stood tall against the setting sun, casting long shadows across the square. He remembered standing there just weeks ago, watching Judge Harper being led away in handcuffs. It had been a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for everyone who believed in justice. As he parked his car and stepped out into the cool night air, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. For his colleagues, for his community, and for the chance to play a part in something bigger than himself. Later that night, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. Justice wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was worth fighting for. And as long as there were people willing to stand up, even when it was hard, he knew the world would keep moving closer to fairness, one step at a time. In the distance, the lights of the courthouse glimmered faintly, a reminder of both the challenges ahead and the victories already won. Marcus smiled softly, savoring the quiet peace of the moment. Change might not come quickly, but it always came eventually. And sometimes, just sometimes, it arrived exactly when it was needed most.